The Galactic Council chamber was eerily silent as the holographic display flickered to life in the center of the massive hall. Representatives from hundreds of alien species, each more advanced than the last, stared at the grainy footage with growing unease. It was a live feed from the front line, a place they had long assumed would never fall. The Zelrath had arrived. They were a race feared across the known universe, a war-driven species that consumed entire civilizations, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. The Galactic Council had fought them before, but never won. The best they could do was delay the inevitable, sacrificing planets in the hopes of buying time. But now, Earth was in their path, a small, unassuming world on the fringes of the galaxy. It had no interstellar empire, no fleets of warships patrolling the void. By all accounts, it was primitive. The humans still fought among themselves, still relied on fragile political structures. Their technology was centuries behind even the weakest council species. Yet, something was wrong. The footage showed Zelrath warships descending through Earth's atmosphere, their spiked hulls glowing red as they prepared for planetary bombardment. And then, they stopped. No explosion, no destruction, no screams of terror. Instead, the Zelrath ships hovered in place, unmoving, the silence stretched across the battlefield, broken only by static-filled transmissions from the confused invaders. Their advance had halted in mere moments, as if some unseen force had grabbed their war machines and held them in an unbreakable grip. The Council watched as Earth's response began. Human aircraft, ancient by galactic standards, screamed through the sky in tight formations, their missiles streaking toward the immobilized Zelrath fleet. The impact was devastating. Explosions tore through the alien ships, sending debris raining down onto the cities below. The humans weren't just fighting back, they were winning. A murmur spread through the chamber. "This is impossible," hissed the Ralvex ambassador, his many eyes wide with disbelief. "Those ships have conquered worlds protected by entire armadas, and now they're being shot down by projectile-based weaponry." More footage appeared. Ground battles. Zelrath warriors, 7 feet tall, armored in bioorganic plating, equipped with energy weapons capable of melting steel, were being cut down in droves. By humans. Primitive bullets shredded through their bodies. Explosives designed for human warfare turned Zelrath fortifications into rubble. And when the fighting got too close for ranged weapons, the humans tore them apart with their bare hands. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some council members whispered that the footage had to be faked. Others demanded immediate intervention, fearing that if the Zelrath fell here, humanity would rise too far, too fast. But then came the final transmission. A battered Zelrath warlord, his face bloodied and his breathing ragged, staring into the camera. Behind him, the ruins of his once mighty fleet burned in the distance. He spoke one sentence before the signal cut out, his voice filled with something no one had ever heard from his kind before. Fear. "Do not come to Earth. It is already theirs." The Council could do nothing but tremble. Panic spread through the Galactic Council chamber like wildfire. The very idea that the Zelrath, the same species that had ground entire civilizations into dust, had been reduced to fear was unthinkable. Yet the proof was undeniable. The footage of Earth's counterattack replayed on the central screen. Again and again, the Council watched as humans tore through the Zelrath forces. Their primitive weapons should have been useless, their defenses laughable, their species easily crushed. But that wasn't what had happened. Humanity had annihilated them. The Speaker of the Council, a towering Selnari elder with shimmering blue skin and 6 piercing eyes, finally rose from his seat. His voice was slow, careful, but the undercurrent of dread could not be hidden. "We must consider what this means," he said, his mandibles clicking. "If Earth is capable of defeating the Zelrath, what does that mean for the rest of us?" The room fell silent again. For eons, the Galactic Council had believed itself to be the highest authority in the known universe. Every species within its ranks had been weighed, measured, and categorized. Those who were weak were ignored. Those who were strong were brought into the fold. Those who resisted were dealt with. Humanity had never been considered a threat. They were a Category 2 species, barely capable of interstellar travel, possessing no significant fleets, no advanced energy weapons, and no unified planetary government. A race still entangled in its own primitive conflicts. Yet despite all of that, they had just done something no species had ever managed before. They had broken the Zelrath. A reptilian delegate from the Drawl Dominion clicked his talons against the stone table, his frilled crest rising in unease. Perhaps it was a fluke, he suggested, though his voice lacked confidence. The Zelrath may have underestimated them. A miscalculation, nothing more. The screen shifted, displaying intercepted Zelrath transmissions, broken messages filled with desperation and confusion. Their minds. Something is wrong with their minds. They do not fight for survival. They fight for destruction. They are laughing while they kill us. The room turned deathly quiet. A heavy bipedal creature with cybernetic enhancements let out a deep, synthetic growl. "Laughter?" the Bhavanti warlord rumbled. "Why would they be enjoying this?" A soft chime rang through the chamber. A new transmission. The delegates stiffened. It was coming directly from the Sol system. The humans had never reached out to the Council before. They had barely acknowledged the greater galactic community. Until now. The image flickered to life. A human stood before them, dressed in simple military attire. His features were sharp, his eyes cold. But what unsettled the Council the most wasn't his appearance. It was the smile on his face. It wasn't the expression of a species that had barely survived an invasion. It wasn't relief. It wasn't exhaustion. It was amusement. The human spoke, his voice calm, almost casual. "You're watching, aren't you?" The council members shifted uncomfortably. The human's smile widened. "You wanted to see what we're capable of. I hope the show didn't disappoint." A murmur rippled through the chamber. No species had ever addressed the council in such an informal, almost mocking tone. The human continued, his eyes locking onto the screen as if he could see each of them directly. "We know who you are. We've known for a while now. You like to sit in your little towers, playing judge over the galaxy, deciding who gets to thrive and who gets to die." His expression darkened, the smile fading. "You thought Earth was weak. You thought we were primitive." He leaned in slightly, and the transmission flickered with static. "You have no idea what we are." He gestured behind him, and the screen shifted to a live feed of Earth. Not just the war-torn battlefields, but cities, factories working at full capacity, research facilities with blueprints for weapons the Council couldn't even comprehend. Humans preparing. For centuries, we fought each other. We wiped out entire civilizations before we even left our own planet. Do you think an alien invasion was going to break us? He chuckled, shaking his head. You just gave us a reason to unite. A low hum of alarm spread through the chamber. The human leaned back, arms crossed. So here's how this is going to go, he said. Earth doesn't need your help. We don't need your approval. And we sure as hell don't need your rules. He let that sink in before delivering the final blow. You just watched us end the Zelrath. He tilted his head. Tell me, what do you think we'll do if someone else comes knocking? The transmission cut. For the first time in history, the Galactic Council knew what fear felt like. The Galactic Council chamber remained frozen in stunned silence long after the transmission ended. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. The weight of what they had just witnessed pressed down on them like an unforgiving force. The Zelrath had been the galaxy's executioners, the enforcers of extinction. For eons, civilizations had trembled at their name. The Council had spent centuries debating ways to contain them, slow them, but no species had ever succeeded in stopping them. Until now. A primitive world, no, a human world, had crushed them utterly, and they hadn't just fought back, they had laughed while doing it. The Ralvex ambassador, still shaking, finally found his voice. We cannot let this stand," he stammered. "If humans have truly destroyed the Zelrath, then that means they are now the dominant force in the galaxy, and that is unacceptable." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Council had been at the top for millennia. They dictated the rules, they controlled the balance of power. The thought of a species outside their grasp rising to such dominance was terrifying. The Droll Dominion's ambassador, his golden eyes narrowed, tapped a clawed finger against the table. "We must consider containment," he said, "a preemptive strike before they become a greater threat." Another species, the insectoid Jatil, clicked its mandibles in warning. "Contain them. Did you not hear what was just said? The humans know about us. They are already preparing. They expected this reaction." Silence fell again. That was the true horror of the situation. The humans had not just defeated the Zelrath. They had sent a message to the rest of the galaxy. They knew exactly what they were doing. The Speaker of the Council, the oldest and most powerful among them, finally exhaled a slow, measured breath. His 6 eyes gleamed with something the other delegates were too afraid to name. "They are not like us," he murmured. "Every species in this chamber rose from struggle, from hardship. But humanity? They rose from war." He gestured toward the darkened holoscreen. "We sit here, afraid of what they might become. But I ask you, what if it is already too late? What if, for all our advancements, for all our intelligence, we were always meant to be their prey?" The words sent a chill through the room. No one had ever considered that possibility, that perhaps they were not the apex species of the galaxy, that perhaps all this time the humans had simply been waiting, lurking in the dark, until the right moment to reveal themselves. The Zelrath had made a mistake. They had forced humanity to unite. They had forced humanity to evolve. Now the Galactic Council had only 2 choices: bend the knee or prepare for war. And deep down, every species in that room already knew the outcome. No one had ever survived a war against humanity, not even humanity itself. The council chamber descended into chaos. For the first time in recorded history, there was no semblance of order. Representatives of dozens of civilizations shouted over one another, some calling for diplomacy, others for war. A few whispered of retreat, of isolation, of hiding from the new apex predator that had just declared its place in the galactic food chain. But there was no hiding from humans. The Droll Dominion ambassador slammed a clawed hand against the table, his frilled crest flaring. "We strike now while they are still contained on their homeworld. We cannot allow this madness to spread." A member of the Jatil delegation, a towering, insectoid being with glistening black carapace, chittered in response. "And how do you suggest we do that? You saw the footage. The Zelrath were not merely defeated, they were eradicated. Their warships were torn from the sky. Their armies were shattered. We cannot fight what we do not understand." The Ralvex representative, still trembling from the transmission, hissed, "Then we contain them. We blockade their system, cut off all potential avenues for expansion, If they cannot leave their world, they cannot threaten us. And what happens when they find a way through? Came a soft, measured voice. The room fell silent. The speaker was an Urali, one of the oldest and wisest species in the council. Their race had never spoken in aggression, never taken part in war. Yet now, their representative sat forward, 6 luminous eyes filled with something close to fear. "You assume humans need our technology to leave their system?" the Urali said, voice calm but firm. "But have you considered the alternative?" The other delegates hesitated. "What do you mean?" the Droll ambassador asked. The Urali exhaled slowly. The Zelrath were far more advanced than humanity. Their warships were decades, if not centuries, ahead of Earth's capabilities. Their mandibles clicked. Yet humanity overcame them. They did not do so with superior firepower. They did not do so with overwhelming numbers. They did so because they are something the galaxy has never encountered before. A cold, sinking realization swept through the chamber. Humans had evolved for war. While other species had advanced beyond their primitive instincts, forming vast and peaceful civilizations, humanity had never left the battlefield behind. Even before they reached the stars, they had mastered warfare on every scale: biological, technological, psychological. They had fought wars over ideals, over resources, over mere words. They had turned violence into an art form. And now, that art had been unleashed on the galaxy. The Speaker of the Council, his 6 eyes heavy with the weight of their future, finally spoke. "There is only one course of action left to us." The entire room fell deathly still. "We must speak with them." A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. Diplomacy? With them? "You cannot be serious," the Droll ambassador spat. "After what we just witnessed, after what they just threatened, you want to sit down and talk?" The speaker's gaze darkened. "And what alternative do you propose?" he asked. "A war? Against an enemy that thrives in war? Against a species that does not surrender, does not retreat, and does not fear death?" No one had an answer. The speaker continued, his voice solemn. "The humans have already won, whether we acknowledge it or not. The Zelrath learned this too late. We will not make the same mistake." A pause. Then, the speaker gave the order that would shape the fate of the galaxy. "Send a delegation to Earth." The Terran military outpost was nothing grand. A simple structure built from reinforced steel and concrete, resting on the outskirts of what had once been a major Zelrath invasion zone. The land still bore scars of the battle: twisted metal, scorched earth, the husks of alien war machines. But the humans had already begun rebuilding. A small Galactic Council envoy stood before the entrance, their ships having been escorted to the surface by Terran aerospace fighters, an act that made it painfully clear who was truly in control. A human soldier stepped forward to greet them. He was unremarkable by galactic standards. No cybernetic enhancements, no energy shields, just flesh and bone. But something in his stance, in the cold, calculating look in his eyes, sent a chill through the delegation. They had met warriors before, but never like this. "You're the delegation, huh?" the soldier said, looking them over. The council emissary, an elder Urali, took a cautious step forward. "We have come to—" Yeah, the soldier interrupted with a smirk. "You want to talk, negotiate, figure out how to deal with us." He nodded toward the entrance. "Come on in. The commander's waiting." The council delegation hesitated. The soldier chuckled, shaking his head. "Relax. If we wanted you dead, we wouldn't be having this conversation." It was not a reassurance. It was a statement of fact. The council members swallowed their fear and stepped forward. For the first time in galactic history, The rulers of the stars had come not to dictate terms, but to beg for them. The council delegation stepped into the Terran outpost, the air thick with tension. It was a stark contrast to the grand halls of the Galactic Council chamber. No gilded architecture, no towering displays of power. Just steel walls, low-humming machinery, and the ever-present weight of something far more dangerous than mere technology. Purpose. Every human in the room, whether scientist, engineer, or soldier, moved with the same focused intensity. There was no idle chatter, no wasted motion. These were not people merely surviving in the aftermath of war. They were preparing for the next one. The delegation was led into a command center, where a single human sat waiting for them. He was older than the soldier who had greeted them, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. His eyes held no fear. The Urali emissary, their bioluminescent eyes flickering with unease, stepped forward. "I am Aronai, representative of the Galactic Council." The human studied them for a moment before responding. "General Elias Carter," he said simply. "No elaborate titles, no unnecessary grandeur, just a name." Aronai hesitated, then pressed on. "We have come to discuss the events that have transpired. There is much concern among the council." A ghost of a smile tugged at the corners of Carter's mouth. "Concern? That's one way to put it." He leaned back slightly. "Let me guess. You're here to decide if we're a threat." Aronai hesitated. "We are here to understand." Carter let out a slow breath. "All right," he said. "Let me make it simple for you." He tapped a console, and a holographic projection appeared. It was a timeline, centuries of war, from the earliest human conflicts to the most devastating planetary battles. Wars that had shaped entire nations, collapsed empires, and redrawn the course of history. "Our history is written in blood," Carter said. "Every species faces hardship. Every civilization struggles to survive. But humanity? We were born in war." He shifted the display to a new image, footage from the Zelrath invasion. A brutal montage of human forces tearing through the enemy, not just with weapons, but with strategy. "We learned something a long time ago," Carter continued. "You don't win wars with superior numbers. You don't win them with superior firepower." He turned his gaze to the delegation. "You win them by outthinking your enemy, by outlasting them, by becoming something they can't predict." Silence filled the room. The Drawl ambassador, his claws twitching slightly, finally spoke. "Then what is it you want, General Carter?" Carter leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "What we want," he exhaled, shaking his head. "You still don't get it, do you?" He stood up slowly, pacing around the table. "We don't want your approval. We don't need your alliances. And we sure as hell don't need your permission to exist." He stopped, locking eyes with each delegate in turn. "The question isn't what we want." His voice dropped to something low and dangerous. "It's what you want." The delegation stiffened. Carter continued, his tone calm but unwavering. "We know the council is debating what to do with us. We know some of you want war, others want containment. A few of you are smart enough to realize neither of those will work." He let the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "You want to know if humanity is a threat?" He tilted his head slightly. "That depends. Are you a threat to us?" The weight of the question settled over the delegation like a suffocating force. Aronai, despite the fear pressing against their very soul, took a slow breath. "We do not wish for war, General Carter." Carter studied them for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you won't have one." Relief rippled through the delegation, only for Carter's next words to drive home a chilling truth. "But if war does come," he said, voice steady. "It will not be like anything you've ever seen before." He leaned forward slightly. "We won't conquer. We won't occupy." He smiled. "We will end you." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For the first time in their existence, the Galactic Council had encountered something beyond their control. Not an empire, not an invader, not a conqueror, but a force that would never be stopped, a force called humanity. 1 year later, the Galactic Council had not declared war, but they hadn't declared peace either. Instead, an unspoken Cold War had begun, one built on fear, uncertainty, and the silent understanding that Earth was now the most dangerous force in the galaxy. The Council had sent probes, attempting to monitor human activities from a safe distance. They wanted to know how quickly humanity was advancing, how much of the Zelrath's technology they had reverse-engineered. They learned nothing. Every probe sent to the Sol system simply vanished. No wreckage, no distress signals, just complete silence. And then, the disappearances started. Not on Earth, not even in the Sol system, but on the fringes of the Council's most powerful empires, entire ships, entire research stations, entire fleets, wiped from existence without a trace. The Council scrambled to uncover the truth. They dispatched their most advanced warships to investigate, believing it to be the work of a rogue faction, perhaps a remaining Zelrath remnant. They found nothing. No wreckage, no distress calls, no evidence that an enemy had even been there. And then, one day, a single derelict warship drifted into Council space. A battle-scarred cruiser from the mighty Drawl Dominion, its hull torn open as if something had ripped it apart from the inside. A distress beacon was still active. The Council intercepted it, bringing the ship into a secure orbital station for investigation. Scientists, engineers, and intelligence officers gathered, desperate for answers. They activated the ship's black box recorder. Static filled the room. Then, a single broken transmission. A voice, panicked, terrified. "They're here! We don't know how. They don't have ships. They don't have fleets, but they're here!" A deep, ragged breath. Then a whisper. "They walk in the shadows. They know where we sleep. They are hunting us." Another pause. The sound of movement, something metal scraping against the floor. A sob. "They're not an empire. They're not a nation. They are ghosts, and they are already here." A loud crash, screaming, gunfire. Then silence. The recording ended. The room was deathly quiet. Then, the monitors flickered. One by one, across the orbital station, every screen turned black before displaying the same thing. A simple message, written in flawless galactic common. "We warned you. Now we are watching." Panic gripped the Council. Humanity had never left Earth, but they had spread. No fleets, no armies, no invasions, yet they were everywhere. And for the first time, the rulers of the galaxy understood what it felt like to be prey. Fear spread like wildfire. The Galactic Council had controlled the stars for millennia, balancing power among its many empires, quelling rebellions before they could take root, deciding the fate of entire species with nothing more than a council vote. Now, they were the ones being hunted, but not by warships, not by invading legions, by something unseen. Entire planetary governors went missing overnight. High-ranking military officers vanished from the safety of their fortified stations. No alarms, no signs of struggle, no bodies, just gone. Some council species refused to believe it was humanity. How could it be? The Drawl Dominion controlled thousands of worlds. The Ralvex Imperium had the most sophisticated intelligence network in the known galaxy. The Jotl swarmed across hundreds of sectors with hive-mind coordination. Yet all of them were losing people. The disappearances weren't random. They weren't chaotic. They were calculated. The council called an emergency session. Inside the grand chamber, the air was thick with paranoia. Every species present had fortified their security, tripled their personal guards, scanned their rooms for human listening devices. It didn't help. They all knew the truth. Humanity was already inside. The Speaker of the Council, a being older than some stars, stood before the assembly. His once steady voice now wavered. "We cannot allow this to continue," he said. "Who among us has not been affected?" No one spoke, because every species in the chamber had already suffered a loss. A Droll warlord gritted his fanged teeth. "This is not warfare," he growled. "This is terror." A representative from the Ralvex Imperium, her many eyes scanning the chamber, nervously hissed, "No, this is worse than terror. Terror is chaotic. This is surgical." The Jatil ambassador, an insectoid creature with razor-sharp mandibles, chittered anxiously. "They are taking our leaders, but why? Why have they not made demands?" That was the part that frightened the council most. Humanity had made no ultimatums, no threats, no speeches. They simply acted. The speaker took a deep breath. "We must open diplomatic channels. We must—" The chamber lights flickered. Every screen inside the grand hall shut off at once. The entire chamber was plunged into silence as the massive central display came to life. A single human stood there, not a diplomat, not a general, just a man in black tactical gear. His face was calm. His voice was steady. "You don't negotiate with us." His eyes swept across the room as if he could see them directly. "You comply." A shudder ran through the assembly. The speaker, swallowing his fear, tried to respond. "We are willing to—" "No," the human cut him off. "You had your chance. Now we decide." The council chamber erupted into protest. "We are the rulers of this galaxy," the Droll warlord roared. "We do not bow to—" The human smiled. Not with arrogance, not with mockery, with certainty. And then he spoke the words that shattered the very foundation of the Galactic Council. "You don't rule anything anymore." The transmission ended. The lights returned. The screens flickered back to their original displays. But something had changed. The council members looked around, each realizing simultaneously that something was different. Half of the seats were empty. Representatives who had been there minutes ago were simply gone. No screams, no sounds, nothing. Just empty chairs. The council had lost control. Humanity had already won. Panic gripped the remaining council members. Some scrambled for their personal security teams, only to find their guards missing. Others activated emergency distress beacons, only to realize that no one was coming. It wasn't just the delegates who had disappeared. Every council-controlled communication hub, every surveillance system, every fleet coordination relay was suddenly silent. The galaxy's rulers had been severed from their own empire. The Droll warlord, once a beacon of arrogance, now trembled. What have they done?" The Speaker of the Council, his ancient skin pale with fear, forced himself to stay composed. "This is impossible," he whispered. "A species with no empire, no fleets. How did they do this?" The answer came from the shadows, a human voice echoing through the chamber's speakers. "We learned from you." A hush fell over the delegates. The screens flickered again. More humans appeared. Not just soldiers, engineers, scientists, strategists, every face calm, every gaze unshaken. "You built this galaxy on control," one human said. "You believed that by keeping species in check, by suppressing threats before they could rise, you would always be in power." Another voice, a woman this time. "But you never accounted for us." The main screen shifted to show something that made the council's blood run cold. A list. Names, coordinates, classifications. It was the entire structure of the Galactic Council's leadership. every hidden base, every classified project, every secret they thought was untouchable. A human stepped forward on the screen, smiling. "You watched us for years, studied us, monitored our wars, our history, our violence." He leaned closer, his voice turning sharp. "But while you were watching us, we were watching you." The silence that followed was absolute. The Droll warlord slammed his fist onto the table. "Enough of this deception!" he roared. "We are the rightful rulers of the galaxy! We will not be intimidated by—" His voice cut off. He reached for his throat, eyes wide, choking on nothing. His powerful limbs thrashed for a moment, then went still. His body collapsed onto the cold floor. Dead. The human on the screen sighed. That was a mistake. Before the council could react, the chamber doors opened, and the humans walked in, not soldiers, operatives. Their movements were precise, silent. They didn't need weapons. The fear was their weapon. One by one, the council members shrank back. "Please," the Ralvex ambassador whispered, his voice trembling. We surrender." The lead human tilted his head slightly, amused. "Surrender?" He took a step closer, and the entire chamber flinched. "This isn't a war," he said. "This isn't a negotiation." His voice turned cold. "This is a transition." Another human stepped forward, a woman with sharp, calculating eyes. "You thought yourselves kings." She gestured at the chamber. "But your empire is already gone. Your fleets no longer obey you. Your generals have vanished. Your colonies have been restructured." A cruel pause. "You are nothing now." Terror filled the room. The Speaker of the Council, once the most powerful being in the known galaxy, looked around, realizing the truth. The Council had already fallen. They were just the last to know. A final message appeared on every screen in the chamber. A new decree, a new order. The Galactic Council is dissolved. The Terran administration is now in effect. And just like that, the rulers of the stars were no more. Humanity had taken the throne. The distress call had been weak, barely more than a whisper against the cosmic void, a desperate plea from a dying world, ignored by every major power in the galaxy. The message was simple. "We are under attack. Our cities burn. Our people fall. Please, help us." No one came. The Arathax Dominion had invaded without mercy. A brutal race of conquerors, they swept through the defenseless world like a storm of fire and steel. Their warships hovered over cities, raining down destruction. Their soldiers marched through the streets, executing any who dared resist. The planet, once known as Valen IV, was doomed to be just another name erased from the star charts, its people enslaved or exterminated. The Galactic Council heard the call and did nothing. They muttered about diplomatic complications, about non-interference treaties, about acceptable casualties. They would not risk war with the Arathax for a world that held no strategic value. And so, the galaxy turned its back. But they had forgotten something. Valen IV was not just any world, it was a human colony, and humanity never let its own fall. The attack fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. 500 warships, a force that should not have existed. The Council had believed humanity was weak, fractured, unable to muster such a force. But they had underestimated them. The fleet's flagship, indomitable, a monstrous dreadnought bristling with weaponry, led the charge. At its helm stood Admiral Elias Vance, his expression carved from stone, his voice calm as he issued the order that would change everything. "Begin orbital bombardment. Let them feel what it's like to be on the receiving end." The skies of Valen IV erupted in fire. The Arathax had never feared humanity. They had seen them as upstarts, primitive and reckless, more suited for dying in the fringes of space than waging war against an empire. They were wrong. Humanity had spent centuries fighting among themselves, perfecting the art of war in a way no other species had. The Council had outlawed mass planetary invasions, had discouraged total war. Humanity had ignored those rules. They had built ships for a fight they had hoped would never come, but had prepared for anyway. And now that preparation was paying off. The Indomitable's rail cannons roared, sending slugs the size of buildings into the Arathax capital ships, tearing through shields and armor like paper. Human corvettes swarmed enemy formations, weaving between their lumbering ships and gutting them with precision strikes. Drop pods rained down like falling stars, each one carrying soldiers clad in exosuits, their armor designed to withstand the worst the galaxy had to offer. They landed in the streets of burning cities, and did not stop. The Arathax expected them to be slow, to be burdened by their heavier armor. Instead, they moved like demons, striking fast and hard, pushing through enemy lines with relentless efficiency. Humanity fought like a species that had spent its entire existence waging war. The battle raged for hours. By the time the last Arathax warship tried to flee, it was too late. Humanity had surrounded them, leaving no escape. Admiral Vance watched as the enemy flagship burned in the void, its hull breaking apart. He did not smile. There was no joy in war, only duty. The people of Valen IV had been abandoned, left to die, but not by humanity, never by humanity. Because when one of their own cried out for help, humanity answered. And they came with fire. The aftermath of the battle left the skies above Valen IV littered with wreckage. Burned-out husks of Arathax warships drifted in the void, their shattered remains a grim testament to humanity's response. On the ground, the fires still smoldered, buildings reduced to rubble, bodies, both human and Arathax, scattered like discarded dolls. Admiral Elias Vance stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, staring at the ruined landscape below. His fists clenched at his sides. Victory had come, but at a cost. Thousands of colonists had died before the fleet arrived. Entire cities had been razed. The Arathax had made sure that even in defeat, they left scars. "Admiral," a voice broke his thoughts. It was Captain Layla Monroe, his second in command. "The ground teams are securing the last of the Arathax prisoners. Resistance has ceased." Vance nodded, his face unreadable. "Casualties." "Heavy, sir, both military and civilian." He exhaled slowly. The cost of war was always blood, but that didn't mean it had to be in vain. "Open a channel to all surviving colonists," Vance ordered. A moment later, his voice was broadcasted across the ruined planet. "This is Admiral Elias Vance of the Terran Defense Fleet. The Arathax are defeated. Your home is yours once more. We came because no one else would, because humanity does not abandon its own. We mourn the dead, but we stand for the living. And to the Arathax," he paused, his voice cold as steel. "You thought no one would come. You were wrong, and you will never forget this day." On the surface, survivors staggered from underground shelters and half-collapsed buildings, their faces dirty, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. Some wept. Others simply stared in disbelief at the sight of Terran soldiers patrolling the streets, not as conquerors, but as liberators. A young girl, no older than 10, clutched her mother's hand as she watched a squad of soldiers clear debris from a collapsed school. One of them, his armor scratched and dented from battle, knelt beside her, pulling a ration bar from his pack. "Here, kid," he said gruffly, handing it over. She hesitated, then took it. Are they gone?" The soldier glanced at the sky, where the wreckage of the enemy still burned. "Yeah," he said. "They're gone." For the first time in weeks, she smiled. But humanity's fight wasn't over. In the dark corners of the galaxy, the Arathax Dominion reeled from their unexpected defeat. No one had ever hit them so hard before, had ever made them bleed so badly. And now, their high command sat in stunned silence, watching the footage of their burning fleet, their fallen soldiers. They weren't supposed to be capable of this, one of the warlords muttered. They weren't supposed to care, another growled. The council ignored the colony. We assumed the humans would too. The supreme warlord, a towering figure with coal-black eyes, leaned forward. Then we assumed wrong. His voice was low, dangerous. Humanity is not the weak, divided species we thought. They came when no one else did, and they came with fire and vengeance. A silence stretched across the chamber. Then we must prepare, one of the warlords said. Because if they did this for a single colony, what will they do if we push them further? The Supreme Warlord's fingers curled into a fist. They will come again. His eyes burned with something between fury and admiration. And this time, we must be ready. The fires of Valen IV had barely cooled when the first whispers of war began to spread. Across the galaxy, the news of humanity's intervention sent shockwaves through political halls, war councils, and hidden power brokers. No one had expected them to act. No one had believed they had the strength, the will, or the ruthlessness to launch such a decisive strike. But humanity had not only responded, they had annihilated the Arathax invasion force. Inside the Grand Hall of the Galactic Council, an emergency session had been called. Representatives from the major species of the galaxy sat in uneasy silence as footage of the battle over Valen IV played on the central display. The destruction was absolute. The Arathax fleet, which had been expected to crush the colony with ease, had been torn apart with terrifying efficiency. This is madness, Chancellor Valen of the Zephyr Union muttered, rubbing his scaled brow. How did they do this? They shouldn't have had the numbers, the technology. They did, a deep voice interrupted. All eyes turned to the Arathax representative, Warlord Sithran. His dark eyes burned with barely restrained rage. His species had never suffered such humiliation. The Terrans were underestimated, Zithran growled. A mistake that will not be repeated. A murmur of unease spread across the chamber. The Arathax Dominion was one of the most powerful military forces in the known galaxy. If they were planning retaliation, the war that followed could shatter the fragile peace the Council had maintained for centuries. Let us not be hasty, Councillor Orvis of the Sithari Alliance said carefully. Perhaps this was an anomaly, a single instance of human aggression provoked by the attack on their colony. We have long known them to be emotional, protective of their own. This does not mean they are a true threat to the balance of power. Zithran's lip curled in disgust. You are a fool if you believe that, he snapped. Look at what they did. 500 warships. Soldiers in numbers we did not think they possessed. They crushed us. And when they spoke to the survivors, their admiral made it clear. This was only the beginning. The chamber fell into silence. Then, slowly, a voice spoke from the shadows. They have been preparing for war. Every head turned as High Speaker Luthen of the Vren Coalition stepped forward. The Vren were an ancient species, their people known for their long memories and careful strategies. They had watched humanity more closely than most. We thought them chaotic, Luthen continued, his eyes narrowing. Unorganized, too busy fighting among themselves to be a threat. But we were wrong. He gestured toward the screen, where the Indomitable hovered over Valen IV like a silent guardian. They are not fractured. They are united. They did not hesitate to act, and they did not ask for permission. This is not the sign of a weak race. A tense silence stretched between the council members. Finally, Chancellor Vilain exhaled sharply. "Then we must ask ourselves a question," he murmured. "One that will determine the future of this galaxy." He looked around the room, eyes heavy with unspoken fear. Are the humans our allies, or our doom? Back on Valen IV, the surviving colonists worked alongside Terran soldiers, rebuilding what had been lost. Admiral Vance stood on the edge of the ruined city, gazing up at the sky, where the Terran fleet still held position. "This won't be the last time we do this," Captain Monroe said beside him. Vance nodded. "Number it won't." She hesitated. "What do you think the Council will do?" He exhaled slowly. "They'll debate, they'll hesitate, they'll lie to themselves, pretend we're still a small, insignificant species." Then, finally, he turned to face her, his expression hard. "But the Arathax won't wait. They'll come back, stronger, angrier, and this time they won't just target a colony." Monroe swallowed. "Earth." Vance didn't need to answer. They both knew the truth. Valen IV had been the spark. The fire was coming. The war drums of the Arathax Dominion beat in the darkness of space. From the shattered remnants of their fleet, survivors returned to their home world, carrying a message of humiliation and vengeance. Warlord Zithran stood before the grand conclave of the Dominion, his body still bearing the wounds of Valen IV, his pride bleeding far worse than his flesh. "We were wrong about humanity," he growled, his voice echoing through the war hall. "We thought them weak. We thought they would not come. They did, and they brought with them a fire unlike any we have ever faced." A murmur spread through the warlords gathered before him. The Arathax prided themselves as conquerors, undefeated for centuries. But now the stars themselves whispered of their failure. A towering figure stepped forward, High Warlord Varzathan, supreme leader of the Dominion. His presence alone was enough to silence the room. He gazed at Zithran, his expression unreadable. "You return in disgrace," Varzathan said, "but disgrace is not the same as defeat. Tell me, Warlord, did you learn?" Zithran clenched his fists. "Yes, High Warlord." He took a slow breath. "We underestimated them. Their technology is not as primitive as we believed. Their strategies are not as reckless as we assumed. And worst of all," his jaw tightened, "they are not afraid of us." Varzathan remained silent for a long moment. Then slowly he spoke. "Good." The room stilled. "Fear makes for weak enemies," the High Warlord continued. "I would rather face a foe that fights, a foe that bleeds, a foe that makes us stronger." His dark gaze swept over the assembled warlords. "But they must understand their place. Humanity has made their move." His voice dropped to a dangerous growl. "Now we make ours." Zithran straightened. "Then you authorize war?" Varzathan smiled, a slow, predatory thing. "Not yet." He turned to a nearby holomap, where the sectors of space flickered in brilliant blues and reds. "Humanity fights with emotion," he mused. "They respond when their own are threatened. So we will not threaten their colonies. We will go for the throat. We will make them fear for the homeworld they protect." The warlords stiffened, understanding dawning in their eyes. Earth. On the far edge of Terran space, Admiral Elias Vance stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as the first wave of reinforcements arrived. The fleet was growing. Fast. Humanity had been preparing for war long before Valen IV. The moment the Galactic Council abandoned them, the moment the major powers of the galaxy had dismissed them as insignificant, humanity had known this day would come. And so they had built in secret. They had constructed warships under the guise of defensive expansion. They had designed weapons that the rest of the galaxy had never seen. They had trained soldiers for a war that no one believed they could fight. Vance turned to Captain Monroe. Status report. 20 additional warships arrived from the Martian shipyards this morning, she said. We're integrating them into the fleet now. Ground forces are cycling through training rotations. Morale is high. Everyone knows what's coming. Vance nodded. They all felt it. The tension in the air, the quiet before the storm. Humanity had made its move. Now they were waiting for the counterattack, and it would come. You think they'll hit the outer colonies again? Monroe asked. Vance shook his head. No. He exhaled slowly, his eyes dark. If I were them, I'd go straight for Earth. Monroe's expression hardened. Then we need to be ready. Vance turned back to the massive viewport, watching the fleet prepare. They would be ready, because when the Arethax came, humanity would show them what war truly meant. The Arethax invasion fleet moved like a silent storm through the void, its massive warships blotting out the stars as they advanced toward their target. Earth. The Dominion had not sent raiding parties this time. They had not come for resources or colonies on the fringes. They had come to end humanity before they could grow into a true galactic power. High Warlord Varzathan stood aboard the bridge of his flagship, the Eclipse of Dominion, watching as his fleet sailed through the cold expanse of space. His expression was calm, but beneath it burned a hunger for retribution. Time to target? He asked. 3 standard days, one of his officers reported. Human fleet formations detected in the Sol system. They are preparing for war. Varzathan smiled darkly. Let them prepare. This would not be a mere battle. This would be an extermination. Back on Earth, the skies were alive with movement. Massive orbital platforms churned with activity as battleships were loaded with final supplies. Fighters screamed across the sky in tight formations, weaving between towering skyscrapers that had been transformed into last resort defensive positions. Humanity had seen this coming, and they were ready. Admiral Elias Vance stood in the war room beneath the United Terran Command Center in Geneva, surrounded by holographic projections of the incoming Arethax fleet. The enemy was vast, 2,000 warships, countless strike craft, and enough firepower to reduce Earth to dust. The room was tense. High-ranking officers, generals, and political leaders all stood around the table, watching as the red wave of enemy ships closed in. President Alan Graves broke the silence. What's our best estimate, Admiral? Vance's voice was steady, but grim. They outnumber us 3-1. Their ships are larger, more heavily armored, and have greater energy output. A murmur spread through the room. But they don't have our technology, Vance continued. They don't have our tactics, and most of all, they don't have our will. Graves nodded slowly. Then what's the plan? Vance stepped forward, his eyes locked on the incoming enemy formation. We draw them in, make them think they're winning. He gestured toward the outer planets of the Sol system. We feign a desperate defense at Jupiter. We give them blood, but we don't break. When they push forward, we snap the trap shut. A new hologram flickered into existence. Hidden Terran battle groups, concealed on the dark side of the moon, buried beneath Mars' surface, waiting in deep space beyond the system. When they commit their forces to the final push toward Earth, we cut off their retreat, Vance said, his voice like steel. We will turn Sol into a graveyard. They will come expecting conquest. They will find annihilation. The room was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, President Graves nodded. Then let's give them hell. 3 days later, the Arethax fleet entered the Sol system. And humanity was waiting. The Arethax armada surged into the Sol system like a tidal wave of death. The vastness of their fleet was a sight the galaxy had rarely seen. 2,000 warships, countless support craft, and planetary bombardment weapons capable of rendering Earth into molten ruin. From the bridge of the Eclipse of Dominion, High Warlord Varzathan watched as his forces swept past the gas giants. The primitive Terran outposts stationed on Jupiter's moons were obliterated in moments, their defenses crumbling under the sheer might of the Dominion's firepower. "Resistance is weak," one of his officers reported. "Terran forces are retreating toward Mars." Varzathan exhaled in amusement. "Good," he murmured. "Let them run. Let them feel powerless before us." But as his fleet pushed deeper into the system, an uneasy sensation crawled at the edges of his mind. Something was off. The humans were fighting back, yes, but not the way he expected. They weren't making a final stand at Jupiter or Mars. They weren't throwing their full fleet into a desperate last-ditch battle. Instead, they were withdrawing in an orderly, calculated fashion, skirmishing just enough to slow the Arathax advance before falling back again. Varzathan's eyes narrowed. They weren't retreating. They were luring him in. On the dark side of the moon, deep within the concealed command center of Lunar Defense Station Aegis, Admiral Elias Vance stood with his arms crossed, watching the battle unfold in real time. The Arathax were doing exactly what he needed them to do. Captain Monroe stood beside him, scanning the tactical readout. "They're pushing hard," she said. "We've lost the outer listening posts. Some of our outposts in the asteroid belt have gone dark." "Acceptable losses," Vance replied coolly. His eyes locked onto the massive red cluster representing the enemy fleet. "They're too focused on the chase. They think we're running." Monroe nodded. "And when they get too close?" Vance's lips curled into a grim smile. "We shut the door." Hours later, the Arathax reached Earth's orbit. The planet was before them now, bathed in blue and green, its cities glimmering like jewels in the darkness of space, the homeworld of humanity, the prize. Varzathan stared at it, a slow smirk forming on his face. "It's over," he declared. "Begin orbital bombardment preparations. We burn this world to ash." The command deck erupted into activity. Orders were issued, targeting systems locked onto key cities: New York, London, Beijing, Moscow. Within minutes, the fleet would rain fire down upon them. Then, the alarms screamed. "What is this?" an officer barked. Varzathan turned sharply toward the tactical display, his eyes widening as hundreds of Terran warships erupted from hidden positions behind the Moon, Mars, and deep space beyond Pluto. They hadn't been retreating. They had been lying in wait. "Impossible!" someone shouted. A new voice cut through the bridge, deep and cold. "Varzathan." The holoscreen flickered, and suddenly Admiral Elias Vance was staring straight at the Arathax warlord. "You walked right into it." The human fleet opened fire. The battle for Earth had begun. The void of space ignited with the fury of 1,000 suns. The moment the trap was sprung, humanity struck with merciless precision. From behind the moon, from the depths of Mars, from the shadows of deep space, warships surged forward, their weapons unleashed in a cataclysm of fire and destruction. Arathax warships, caught in tight battle formations, were torn apart before they could react. Mass drivers, railguns, and plasma lances ripped through their thick hulls like they were made of paper. Swarms of Terran starfighters darted through the chaos, slipping between enemy defenses and delivering payloads of hyperkinetic rounds directly into weak points. Admiral Elias Vance watched from the bridge of the Indomitable, his expression stone cold as the battlefield unfolded. "They're trying to reposition," Captain Monroe said, her fingers dancing across the holomap. "We hit them too fast. They're scrambling." "Not fast enough," Vance replied. "Keep the pressure on. No mercy." On the battlefield, the Arathax fleet reeled. High Warlord Varzathan bared his fangs as the eclipse of dominion shuddered violently, sparks flying across the command deck. "Report!" he roared. "Multiple capital ships destroyed. We're being flanked. The humans, they were waiting for us." Varzathan's mind raced. This was not the desperate defense of a dying species. This was a counteroffensive, one planned with chilling precision. "We underestimated them," he growled, gripping the railing. "We thought them weak. That was our mistake." But mistakes could be corrected. "Pull back the second and third battle groups," he ordered. "Regroup and push forward. Crush their flanks. Break their encirclement." His warlords hesitated. "But High Warlord, our retreat is cut off." A slow, sinking feeling settled in Varzathan's gut. He turned to the tactical display. Humanity's fleet had maneuvered around them with terrifying speed. Their retreat routes were gone. Their forces were surrounded. The realization hit him like a hammer. This wasn't just a battle. This was an execution. Across the battlefield, Terran warships pressed the attack, giving no quarter. Aboard the Indomitable, Vance watched as the enemy fleet faltered. Their formations broke. Their ships fired wildly, desperately trying to carve an escape route that no longer existed. "This is it," Monroe said. "They're finished." Vance nodded. He activated the fleet-wide comms. "All ships, engage at will." A final wave of missile salvos and railgun volleys slammed into the Dominion fleet. The massive Arathax battleships, once symbols of their unstoppable empire, were torn apart one by one, reduced to drifting wreckage in the void. Varzathan's flagship, the Eclipse of Dominion, was the last to fall. As its burning hull spiraled toward Earth's atmosphere, its final transmission echoed through the darkness. "We should have killed them before they became a threat." Then, with a final explosion, the last remnants of the Arathax invasion fleet ceased to exist. Humanity had won, and the galaxy would never underestimate them again. The wreckage of the Arathax fleet drifted lifelessly in the void, a silent graveyard of twisted metal and shattered warships. The once mighty armada that had come to erase humanity had been utterly destroyed. On Earth, cheers erupted across every city, every bunker, every military command center. People poured into the streets, waving flags, embracing strangers, crying tears of relief and victory. From the underground war rooms of Geneva to the orbital stations that had barely survived the initial skirmishes, the message was the same. Humanity had won. But on the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Elias Vance was not celebrating. He stood motionless, watching the tactical screen, his mind still processing what had just happened. The Dominion was powerful, ruthless, unforgiving, and now they had suffered the worst defeat in their history. Captain Monroe approached cautiously. "Sir, the battle is over. We did it." Vance exhaled, his jaw tightening. "No," he said quietly. "We won a battle. The war is just beginning." Monroe frowned. "You think they'll come back?" Vance turned to her, his expression grim. "We just humiliated one of the strongest empires in the galaxy. They won't let this stand." He glanced at the wreckage of the Arathax fleet. "Next time," he said, "they won't just send an invasion force." He met Monroe's eyes. "They'll send everything." Far beyond the Sol system, on the Dominion homeworld of Zarkon, the news of the catastrophe had reached the throne room of the Arathax High Council. The room was vast, dark, and lined with towering banners of past conquests. At its center sat the Primarch of Dominion, the supreme ruler of the Arathax. His 6 golden eyes glowed dimly as he listened to the trembling voice of the warlord who had survived the battle. They fought like no species we have ever faced," the warlord stammered. "Their strategies, their ferocity. It was as if they knew every move we would make before we made it." The Primarch's claws tapped against his stone throne. "And what became of High Warlord Varzathan?" The warlord hesitated. Then, bowing his head, he spoke. "Dead, my lord. His fleet, gone." Silence. The gathered warlords shifted uneasily, awaiting the Primarch's reaction. Then, slowly, the ruler of the Arathax dominion rose from his throne. His towering form cast a shadow across the chamber, his presence suffocating, his aura of power undeniable. For centuries, no species had dared to stand against the dominion. But now, humanity had shattered that illusion. "They thought no one would come to their aid," the Primarch said, his voice like distant thunder. "They believed they were alone. But when we came to conquer," his 6 golden eyes burned brighter. "Earth's mightiest armada arrived." His claws clenched into fists. "Very well. If it is war they desire—" He turned to his gathered warlords, his voice a whisper that rumbled through the chamber like a storm. "Then we shall bring them extinction." The war for humanity's survival had only just begun. The celebrations on Earth lasted for days, but Admiral Elias Vance had no time to indulge in victory. He knew the war was far from over. Inside the United Terran Command Center, deep beneath Geneva, holographic displays flickered with disturbing intelligence. Reports from long-range probes and deep space scouts told a terrifying story. The Arathax Dominion was moving. "We've intercepted their transmissions," said Lieutenant Kaito, the head of Terran intelligence. "The Dominion High Council is furious. They've declared us a cosmic infestation that must be eradicated." Vance folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "What are we looking at?" Kaito tapped a command on the holotable. A new fleet materialized in the projection. It was like nothing they had seen before. "The Dominion isn't just sending another invasion force," Kaito said grimly. "They're mobilizing their entire war machine." The room fell silent. Hundreds, no thousands of warships, far beyond what humanity had just fought off. Dreadnoughts the size of cities. Siege platforms capable of obliterating entire continents. Weapons so advanced that even the best minds in the Sol system could barely comprehend them. This is a full-scale eradication campaign," said Captain Monroe. "They don't just want to conquer us anymore, they want us gone." Vance's jaw tightened. He had expected retaliation. He had expected vengeance. But this was genocide in the making. President Alan Graves, standing at the head of the room, took a deep breath. "What are our options?" Vance's voice was low but firm. "We fight." Graves narrowed his eyes. "Can we win?" Vance turned back to the holomap. The odds were impossible. 3,000 Dominion warships against the battered remnants of Earth's fleet. And yet, when he looked at the faces around the table, he saw no fear, only defiance. He exhaled. "We don't need to win," he said. "We just need to make them regret coming." Across the galaxy, the largest armada in Arathax history began its march toward Earth. At its helm, aboard the Harbinger of Extinction, stood the Primarch of the Dominion himself. He gazed at the distant stars, his 6 golden eyes filled with cold fury. "Let the humans gather their fleet," he murmured. "Let them believe they have hope." His claws flexed. "This time we do not stop until their world burns to its core." And so the final war for humanity's survival began. The storm of war came faster than anyone had predicted. Within weeks, the Dominion's apocalyptic fleet surged toward the Sol system. The vastness of their numbers was beyond anything humanity had faced before. 3,000 warships, siege platforms capable of turning planets to molten wastelands, swarms of hunter-killers designed to seek out and eliminate survivors. Against them stood Earth's last line of defense. The United Terran Armada, battered but unbroken, assembled at the edge of the system. Every remaining warship, every station-mounted cannon, every last defensive satellite was turned toward the incoming storm. Even civilian freighters had been retrofitted with makeshift weapons. The people of Earth did not run. They did not beg for mercy. They stood. The Battle of Sol was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The Dominion came with overwhelming force, but the Terran fleet fought like demons. Human warships, outnumbered and outgunned, executed daring maneuvers that defied all logic. Fleets of AI-controlled drones filled the void, slamming into Dominion vessels with terrifying precision. Orbital platforms rained nuclear fire onto the approaching enemy. And when the Dominion breached Mars' defense line, humanity deployed its final weapon. The Thanatos Protocol. Experimental dark matter warheads, forbidden by interstellar law, were detonated within the heart of the enemy fleet. Reality itself seemed to tear apart as gravitational distortions shredded hundreds of Arethax warships. But even that was not enough. The Dominion pushed forward. They shattered Earth's first line of defense. They broke past Mars. They reached Earth's orbit, and then humanity did what it always did best. It adapted. Using guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and desperate last stands, human forces fought on. Even when the orbital stations fell, even when the space docks were turned to rubble, humanity refused to surrender. Then, in one final act of defiance, Admiral Elias Vance led a suicide strike against the harbinger of extinction, the flagship of the Dominion Primarch himself. With his last breath, Vance detonated the Indomitable's reactor, taking the Arethax leader with him. The Dominion fleet, leaderless and bleeding, hesitated, and humanity seized the moment. From hidden bunkers on Earth, from the last surviving warships, from the depths of the asteroid belt, humanity struck back with everything they had left. The once invincible Arethax broke, and when the remnants of their fleet fled, humanity did not pursue them. They simply watched. Watched as the Dominion, the once great conquerors of the galaxy, ran from the species they had sought to destroy. Years later, the scars of war still remained. Earth had been battered, but it endured. The Dominion, once the greatest power in the galaxy, had never recovered from their defeat. Other alien civilizations, once too afraid to challenge them, rose up in rebellion. The empire that had terrorized the stars for centuries began to crumble. Humanity had not just survived. They had changed the fate of the galaxy forever. And so, when future generations looked to the stars, they did not see darkness. They saw a future they had won with blood and fire. Because when the universe came to erase them, when the Dominion believed Earth would stand alone, when all hope seemed lost, Earth's mightiest armada arrived.